Hi, this is my Red Scorpion's 7th Company Captain. I really like seeing other people's models painted on the internet, and I thought I'd just share my guy with moving pictures. This was a Finecast model which had loads of air bubbles and things, which was a real pain to try and clean up. It's not perfect, there's a few dodgy issues with this model, but I'm really happy with him. I've been thinking about this guy for ages, and probably about 5 years this guy's been in my head. Just the pose of the Stern Guard model that I used with the conversion, I just felt it like it sort of would suit an angled rock. I wanted to you'd have like a real sort of like a guy with a bolter as like the sort of captain of the 7th Company. They're like the tactical sort of reserve company. I just wanted him to be like sort of the epitome of like what all standard Space Marines can like aspire to. Added a bit of freehand text on his leg there. Reads Badab. The whole force is very sort of Badab themed. Little scorpion on his head was a bit of a pain to paint. I added a tiny little white dot. Well, it's actually off-white, but there's just a tiny little bright dot on the very tip of the stinger, just to help define that. And the skull, the orc skull on the base, was a very late addition to the model. I had him finished for a while, and I decided to just add the skull to add a bit more detail. The tufts, they're just off eBay from a seller on there. Here, the gem on the shoulder pad. I think I've got the light in the wrong place. The little white point should be more above, like at the top of the gem, slightly back. I think this part of the problem with this is when I was painting it sort of on my cork, just getting the position that he was in, like relative to like up and down, is quite tricky, and sometimes you mess up and do things like that. Here with the bolt gun, there really should be, I think there should be a brighter highlight on the lower portion of the grip, on the top of it. It's probably a bit too muted. It's darker than the highlight on the bottom of the top part of the gun. That probably makes no sense, but there's a bit under there. There's a bit on the strap there underneath which I've messed up. There's a wide edge highlight where it's sort of on the underside where it shouldn't be. Yeah, getting the metallics on the backpack was a nightmare, like the eagles. Sort of weird rounded shapes, very difficult to sort of place where like the light would be, because it's not a flat surface, it's not a sphere, so you don't just have a single point. It's not a sloping metal surface, so you don't have the highlights towards the bottom. It was very tricky. I found that very difficult. Yeah, I really like the sort of appearance of true metallic metals. I'm not really a fan of NMM. It's just not really my style at all. But there's obviously a lot you can learn from looking at NMM, non-metallic metal sort of painting, to sort of figure out where you put the shades and highlights on true metallics. So I'm just trying to get better at doing true metallics, playing with the sort of the shine of the surface as well. So obviously you have like a more matte finish in the shadows, and sort of and you have like so you want the shine to be more where the highlight is, but then the shine sort of needs to gradient off along with the actual brightness of the metal. So it's quite to control that you obviously use various different matte finishes. I quite like to, so I use so you use the brightest metallic you have sort of on the edge, and you sort of blend that out, and then you also want to put a really matte colour. So in some instances I've used things like Thunderhawk blue, and I've used obviously black, and then some of the shades like Coelia Greenshade, and also sometimes I use Drakenhoff Nightshade, and obviously Nuln oil, the best oil, to sort of give a bit of that extra and that matte appearance in there. The metals I've also used, well, on this whole model I've actually also used an oil pin wash to just kind of really seep into all those cracks and crevices, particularly on the shoulder pad and also the chest eagle, just to really help define it. I was actually quite pleased with the way the chest eagle came out. I glazed a bit of the pink that I used Warlock purple. Got an old pot of Warlock purple. It's on its last legs, but I'm still I bring it out for special occasions. Yeah, to do this sort of thing. Yeah, just added a little bit of the pink into the gold just to sort of warm it up and sort of give a nice sort of nuance to the colour. Create a bit more interest, because you know at the end of the day this guy's painted grey predominantly, so yeah, anything you can do to sort of just add a bit of extra colour to that is really useful. I mean, I could have added some greens and things into the grey, but the whole army is just painted pretty much flat Eshin grey, highlighted with Mechanicus standard grey and then Dawnstone on the edges, with obviously a bit of white here and there dotted on the sharpest points. Yeah, so I could have added extra colours, but I didn't want to, because the rest of the army's just painted in this sort of standard, sort of really standard Eshin grey colour. Very flat colour. Then you know the rest of the, hopefully the rest of the parts of the model then can sort of stand out themselves. Like the yellow obviously stands out really well, but you've got things like the black of the bolt gun and the weathering powder as well around the feet. But that's light rust weathering powder from Forge World. And I was really pleased with the little gem on the on the sword pommel. I painted the backpack separately, so I was able to get to the sword pommel and paint that. And the grenades. I actually nearly forgot to paint the little metal rings on top of the grenades, but I did pick them out. Last thing. It's obviously a decal on his shoulder with to indicate it's 7th Company. Yeah, I'm really pleased with him. There's a dodgy bit on the magazine on his gun which needed quite a lot of filling, and I didn't get it right, so I kind of left it just to sort of look like a bit of damage. There was originally a skull or a little eagle on the gun which has been scraped off. The purity seals, they're actually quite straightforward. Doing the text I use a micron pen. I believe it's 0.05mm micron pen, just to do a little bit of scroll. Just really quick and easy. I mean, if you were doing it to like, you know, try and get the best possible results, you'd use a brush and do it with a little bit of like inky kind of paint. But I think just, you know, in general across an army, it's just really convenient to use the micron pen. Just adds that extra bit of detail to the purity seal, but really doesn't take very long. To paint the metallics, I used loads of different paints, loads of different metallic paints, and kind of a combination of them all to create the different, to sort of just create interest in the actual metallics. Because a lot of the time you find if you just use, say, like Retributor and then wash it down with some Reikland Flesh shade, you just find that the metallics just look very uniform and a bit boring. So on these metallics, I think I started off with some Vallejo metal colour steel for the base of the steel, and then this was all. Now I think I would probably wash parts of that, so I would sort of recess shade and possibly drag the shade slightly down the top of the flat surfaces with something like with Nuln oil, I think, and then I used Vallejo metal colour silver just to sort of start off with the highlights, but I also used some Vallejo model colour steel, which is like a crazy bright white metal kind of colour. So I would use some of that on the edges as well, and I find that sort of, it kind of thins down really well, so you can kind of glaze a bit of that on to add a bit of sort of sparkle. I also used a little bit of Leadbelcher glaze here and there, just to again create a bit of sparkle, but in the sort of towards the shadows, but near the sort of mid-tone shadow area. I also used some Thunderhawk blue and Coelia Greenshade, CeeLo Greenshade on the just to add a bit of sort of bluey colour to the metal, which, I don't know, it just makes it look a bit more alive. The gold was a mixture. I think the base colours I used for the gold was a mixture of Vallejo metal coloured gold and copper. Yeah, the Vallejo metal colours are slightly weird. It's a fantastic paint, but I'm just getting to grips with it really, and I find like it'll kind of wet blend well, but you've got to be very fast with it. So what I tend to do is I'll lay the colour down that I want, and then I'll sort of try and tweak it. But at the moment I'm tweaking it more with other paints, so I'll be using more of like the steel and the silver colours to sort of add some white highlights, and then I'm actually in this case I used some glazes of Retributor, of all things, Retributor Armour, to sort of tie the silver highlights in with the gold. And the washes I would use on this would be you would use Leviathan Purple shade from Games Workshop, and also Agrax Earthshade and Seraphim Sepia. I tend not to go with the Reichland Flesh shade. I don't really like the sort of colour of it, to be honest. It's a bit weird. I much prefer using the Sepia. The sepia. Yeah, I much prefer using the sepia. I just prefer the sort of, it's more brown and less sort of fleshy. But yeah, I think that you need to add purple and sort of green. I would use some green on the gold as well to give it a bit more deep shade. There's such a lot of detail in this model, the little chains and things. But yeah, overall, I like this guy. He's the conversion was a bit of a nightmare. I had to take his head out. I had to take his face off, and then give him a new face. So it's obviously a Forge World Red Scorpion's helmet that I've used. I managed to sort of keep the collar on the back of the Marine's body, I had to keep that super thin, and shave off really carefully the parts of the helmet so I could then fit it to the body, and sort of sculpted in a bit of the sort of under armour, the black suit for his sort of neckline. And the shoulder pad, I think I carved off the original shoulder pad. With it being fine cast, it's really quite easy to carve off. And sort of created the shape of the sort of under shoulder part of the arm, which I could then fit the Forge World shoulder pad to. Hopefully this video has been vaguely interesting for some of you, and thanks for watching.